Hello, and how are y'all today? I am Melissa, and I am going to talk to you about the key insights from Chapter 1 of What Really Matters for Struggling Readers. So, one of the things that they were really pointing to, and the key points in this, is the reading achievements and instructions in the U.S. schools. They really talked about in the book. Allison really talked about the instructional practices in the schools that they have evolved from back in the 1950s when it was just basically skills and drills to really starting to be more hands-on and moving towards individualized, more towards what the students may need. And this especially became true post No Child Left Behind, NCLB. The National Reading Panel prioritized research-backed reading instruction, but only the experimental studies were considered when they were doing this. So the NCLB influences, this is that federal impact that came through, is they were trying to close that reading gap, reading achievement gap, but have continued to struggle to meet these goals. It was shown that some of the things that they were putting in place really weren't doing anything to help close that achievement gap. And that comes through those accountability measures. The policymakers that were making them didn't have any classroom experience to make it effective, so it made it very hard to see what was going on. They just wanted the achievement gap closed, but really didn't consider policies and instructional practices that would help close those achievement gaps. So NCLB really starts coming back from the 1960s, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act that was put in place to start trying to close that. Even back then, they were struggling to find those to close that, and the hope was with NCLB would help close those achievement gaps. So, despite the efforts, again, as I mentioned earlier, we still have reading gaps, especially between the low income and the middle class students, and that still persists today, even post NCLB. That continues on. So, what the research, when we start looking at reading proficiency in first grade, we need early intervention. The research showed that with effective lessons, most of the children truly can read at grade level by the end of first grade. And this came from consistent attendance of the students and addressing any disabilities that a student might have. Those were essential in factoring into this process of having students be able to read at grade level by the end of first grade. So one of the misconstrues is in the U.S. reading proficiencies. When it was looked at the international comparison, U.S. fourth graders ranked very well internationally, but it did show that the high poverty schools continue to struggle. The fourth graders, if I remember correctly, in the reading were ranked like fourth in international. So, and they were ranked even at being ranked fourth. It was a small margin between first and fourth places. So the ongoing inequalities so these are those challenges that we're having in achieving reading equality. We still have huge gaps between the economically disadvantaged and the advantaged students, and that is despite the federal efforts that are going in place there. We also have an accountability system and punitive measures that were put in place through NCLB for the schools that were not seeing their AYPs improved year after year. And even when they were putting in those accountability systems for these schools, there was still not a significant closure in these gaps. You know, things such as changing to charter schools, changing teachers, all of that, they weren't seeing that significant gaps closed. And again, those gaps tended to be more in those economically disadvantaged schools versus the schools that had more advantaged students. So the instructional solutions that are going to come about for these struggling readers, we need that high quality instruction. We need to personalize it for the students, make it something that they're interested in. And in personalizing it, it's going to make it more engaging for them. The students are going to be more engaged, and then it becomes more meaningful instruction for the student. And this is especially, for all students, but especially for those struggling readers. We should be more emphasized in those authentic readings, such as things that apply to their life or what they may be interested in, versus rather than just skill drills. The other thing that came about in the reading that was interesting, especially going on today where schools are going away from this, is the teacher's expertise mattering. The role of teacher training. They showed in the studies that he had in the book were that well-prepared expert teachers were essential for improving the outcome for struggling readers. That when you looked at a school that had a certified, experienced or teacher that had been trained, that's what they were training to, versus a non-certified teacher, the students' reading scores were higher with that teacher, the teacher that had been through the training and that were certified. They also state that, you can't just have a certified teacher, that you still need to have those ongoing professional developments that help teachers start addressing different literacy needs. So the conclusion within chapter 1 is really the big key takeaways is that you have to have quality instruction. We got to have the early intervention, and that teacher expertise is that vital for enclosing those achievement gaps. And if we're going to have reforms, they really should be meaningful and comprehensive reading instruction to support those struggling readers effectively. And, I thought it was interesting in reading this is how much of, they were saying in regards to going back to the research, that when they were looking at the various reading programs and doing that one of the research areas that are one of the websites that showed where looking at all of the various intervention programs, there was only one that had been shown research-wise to be proven effective, and that there was only 2 others that were possibly effective. But yet the schools look very far into all of these various different reading programs, and you're showing that they're looking at, they've got, a great salesman, so to say, for lack of better terms, that has really come in and with all of these bells and whistles, and this is going to help them here, it's going to help them decode, it's going to help them be able to read more effectively and doing that. But there was no true research behind it. The research that was coming from the company that was producing it. And so there was no unbiased research that was coming from there. So the article that I found that really kind of came into play here was coming back also to teacher qualifications and the achievement gap in these early primary grades. This is by Donald Easton Brooks and Alan Davis. So what this article looked at was that relationship between the teacher qualifications and the achievement gap in the primary grades. It also focused on the requirements that were set forth by the No Child Left Behind Act. So the key findings here is that with teacher certifications, the students that had those certified teachers scored higher in reading than those that did not. Certifications is linked to the narrowing of that achievement gap. Again, certified teachers have got the training behind them to help them know what's needed and how to best find the needs that suit their students' weaknesses and strengths. So that certification link was linked to that narrowing achievement gap, and particularly when we were talking about African American, between the African American and the European American students. So we were still seeing the a gap between minorities and the European students. NCLB impacted this. They mandated that teachers hold at least a bachelor's degree in state certification, aiming to improve these educational outcomes. So the implication for education is when we're addressing these achievement gaps, the study highlighted the needs for schools to prioritize hiring and retaining certified teachers in early education. And they emphasized the importance of professional development to improve those teachers' effectiveness and student achievement. Just as such as in chapter 1, they address the same things as, that professional development to improve the teacher effectiveness, along with also being a certified teacher. Basically, the broader context is teachers' qualifications. They're essential to providing those equitable education, and especially in those diverse classrooms. So the summary within this article is the research supports, just as what chapter 1 stated, that the critical role of qualified teachers in reducing those achievement gaps for reading in the young student. And it has a call for the ongoing attention to those teacher qualifications and implementation of supportive policies that are going to enhance the teacher effectiveness in early primary grades. And all of this is dealing with NCNB, and it's all pre 2020. And I'm interested in to see, especially now that there is teacher shortages in a lot of classrooms, and you see in a lot of schools where they're finding non-certified teachers to fill in into places, what this is going to do to the achievement gap now. And it would be interesting to see the research that may be coming out about that, because I'm wondering if we're backsliding, because you've got with chapter 1 and Allison stating this, and even in this article stating teacher certification and teacher qualification and ongoing professional development for them is important. So I'm curious to see where that goes in there. So I know it's not a part of either one of these chapters, but it was something that was going through the back of my mind as I read through these articles and this chapter of where we're at now, where you see schools that do not necessarily have certified teachers in all of the classrooms. So to continue on, going into having an instructional activity, I did this for engaging within my 4th graders for the meaningful reading. I do this a lot actually with my 4th graders. I've also seen it done in a modified version for in a 1st grade classroom, and mostly the modification is more due into the maybe the length of time that they're reading and how much. But the objective of this is to improve their reading fluency and comprehension through engaging in meaningful reading experiences. And also to foster the love of reading by connecting text to those students' interest and experiences. I know in chapter 1, it was mentioned once or twice in regards to having students to love reading just because, not to read because they have to. And that is the idea behind this activity. So the materials that you're going to need is a selection of high interest leveled books for the students, and that could be fiction or nonfiction. Then you need to create reading logs for them tracking their reading progress, sticky notes for marking interesting or challenging passages for them, and then a reflection journal for their personal responses. So what the steps are is the students are going to spend about 10 minutes finding, a book, and I would say probably not even 10 minutes. Allow them to choose a book from a curated selection that matches their interest in reading levels. So in a classroom, you may have 3-4 different reading levels, so you need to make sure that you have a reading selection for each of for each grade reading level that's probably going to and should match students' interest and even things that might be going on in their lives now. Then you're going to give them 20 minutes for independent reading. They're going to independently read. They're going to start using the sticky notes to mark key points or sections that are going to resonate with them. And this is going to be something that, it says just do this, but it is something that you're going to have to pre-teach prior to this activity of teaching them how to use these sticky notes and what might be interesting for them, because obviously they can't mark up books and do that. But if they use that sticky note to say, ooh, that's interesting, I want to put that right there, or even make a quick note on that is interesting and stick it onto that area. Then after that, after they do their independent reading, then you're going to bring everybody back together as a class and start having a discussion where you have the students start talking about their various books that they were reading and what might be interesting to them and insights that they about their experience. Not just necessarily what's about in the book, but maybe if they've moved up to a new reading level and this was a little bit more challenging, and have them discuss more about what might have been challenging for them and where they might think that they might need more help. Let them take more ownership of their learning in doing that, in that whether it's coming that they might need help or whether it's coming from you or even from, another student, maybe a partner. Maybe they struggled with reading a particular word, but the student next to them was able to do that, and let them discuss about how that. Focus on their thoughts and the questions that they might have. Again, like I say, not only help them push more into their own taking ownership of their own learning, but also what they found interesting, what they do that. But you want this discussion and sharing to go on for about 15 minutes. After this, you're going to have a reflection, and I would say take 10, maybe 15 minutes at most. But after the reading, you're going to give them back their reflection journal of what they're doing. And the idea behind this is for them to just kind of sit and write. And what did they enjoy about reading? What did they enjoy about the books? What did they do that? What might have been challenging for them? Have them write down any new vocabulary that they might have learned, or even vocabulary words that they might not know, and have that so that they can write it down and come back and maybe look that up. We want them to have connections to their own lives and other texts. So also as they're reading is maybe they read this one particular book and go, oh, wait a minute, I also remember reading something that was similar to that in another book, and have them start trying to connect those texts. The idea behind this is encouraging those critical thinking thoughts and personal connections to the text. So the assessment aspect of this is those reading logs that you were doing that. You want to make sure that you're having them do a reading log or as they're reading, go through and create that, write down what the students are reading to ensure that they are engaging in these texts regularly. You want to collect and evaluate those reflection journals that they're writing in to assess how are they comprehending in regards to the learning and their personal engagement. And again, the goal behind doing this is to ensure that students are improving their fluency and making the connections to the text that they read. So basically, the summary of this is this activity again is to increase their reading volume and engage students in meaningful literacy experiences. And by incorporating these students' interest and promoting that reflection to make them go back and think about that, we're going to start fostering that positive readings culture. In other words, going back to what I said earlier about what I read in the book a couple of times, is have them read because they love it, not read because they have to. And lastly, reference page. Again, chapter 1 for what really matters for struggling readers. This is from Richard Ellington. And then the reference page are the teacher qualification and achievement gaps in early primary grades. And that's by Easton Brooks and Davis.